Dawn, and welcome.
Thank
Um,
you so much.
yeah, so we're happy to have you here, and I'm going to go ahead and go off camera and off mic, and I'll just turn it over to you, okay?
Thank you so much. All right, I'm working around a little camera issue evidently, but that's okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining. I was very excited to be able to come and discuss with you some of the things that are going on in learning and development today, and perhaps more importantly, how that affects us as L&D organizations and how it affects us as individuals in the field. I spend time as a consultant, working with organizations to improve performance through mostly learning strategies, curriculum development. I also work with universities, so I'm constantly monitoring what skills do people need as they enter the workplace, perhaps with a formal degree or without, and how do we make sure that people have those skills? So, of course, I'm very youthful. Thank you for thinking that. But I've been in this field for a very long time. And one of the things that I will acknowledge is that as we have noticed an acceleration in the changes of the field with our response to the pandemic and L&D, I would tell you that those shifts were happening before the pandemic hit. The pandemic just accelerated them and moved them forward. So what I would like to talk to you about today, let me share my screen. And of course, that's the wrong screen. Let me see what I can do here. This is being very stubborn for me. One moment, please. I can't talk and technically troubleshoot at the same time.
No worries. I'll
Feel the
come on
silence
for a
for a
minute.
second. I'm going to have to move some things around,
No
and I have
problem.
a point all set up, and it won't let me do that without moving.
That's all right. You move it around,
Give me one
and
moment.
I do have to say, a very nice compliment for you in the chat. You focus on that, but he was just saying that he loves the kindness and care that he feels from your voice and your tone and your gestures. So that is a nice compliment to hear.
Okay, let's try something else.
And I'll actually throw out a question for chat while we're waiting here. Just coming up off the back of the last session, like when we were talking about being brave, is there the question I have for all of you is there something that you can commit to that you think here's an area that I need to be brave in, or I've been thinking about doing something, like what would it be? What's a goal? Something that you could be brave and be outside your comfort zone a little bit. Jen saying yes to something I'm not sure I'll succeed at. Yeah. Asking for what you want. Leading an LXD function in a global company. Trying something more difficult instead of leaning towards things that are easier. New technologies. New technologies can be super scary. Like they really can be. I mean, that's something we've definitely faced a lot when we're asking, finance and accounting people to learn to code. Like there's a lot of fear and people don't react so great when they're in a place of fear.
Suzanne, I need to go out and come back in, is what the
That's
system is
that's
saying. I
good.
will be
You go
back.
ahead. We're going to finish this conversation or continue this conversation on bravery and new technologies. Yes, we are all trying new technologies during this summit as well. Applying for a number of roles that I've been putting off as I may not tick all the boxes on the job profile. I think that was Davina. Absolutely, you go apply for those things, because as you're hearing from a lot of the recruiters here, just even their view of job descriptions, and hiring managers, that they're not always that realistic. They're kind of casting a wide net and seeing what comes in. So don't let that intimidate you. Don't let it stop you from applying. And then I think, taking it back to the session we had on the LinkedIn networking, is if you're applying for those jobs, see if you can connect with people at those companies. So Kara's working on a book. Kara, I feel like you need to come on stage and talk to me about it. All right, Kara, get ready. Oops. I think I just started a chat with you. I'm trying to make you come on stage. This is what happens. All right, Kara, I think you can turn your camera on. Be brave.
I had to turn on my better lighting.
I have my little lumen cube right above me.
Yeah.
I know. All right, so tell us about it.
I don't know. I've just had like a lot of ideas just like floating around my head. And then I think, would people even be interested in it? Is it too basic? So I think that, I just need to commit to it and get it done. Right. So I'm seeing a big gap in formal learning and development education programs in the real world. And I'd really like to write something to kind of solidify what that transition looks like. I think when people read about what learning design is, it seems like this clean, beautiful process, but we know in the real world it's really messy, right? So really looking to bridge that gap is something I want to do.
I love that. It's a distinct interest of mine as well. I was kind of thought that I'd end up as a university professor, and I still aspire to that someday. But I love sort of the practicality of the hands-on, like getting stuff done in a corporation. So that idea of like bridging the two, because I think there can be such a gap, is something that's very appealing and interesting to me.
All right, I will bounce out because Dawn is back.
We expect to see your book soon. So Brandon's working on writing one. So go talk to Brandon about it. I'm not sure if that'll help with that. Thank you, Kara. All right, Dawn.
Hey, thank you. And thank you, Kara. It's nothing like a little technical challenge to get us through our day and to show how resilient we are as professionals.
And you look just as calm as you did when you joined us the first time. So nicely done.
I can't do anything about it. So I like my energy for things that I can control.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for your patience, and thanks, Kara, for stepping in, and thanks for carrying on. But you know what? That's what we do as L&D professionals, isn't it? All right, so as we go through this presentation on culture shift, I want to start kind of at a global level. I'm building on some of the things you've heard today about, the growth mindset. I was talking to you about how the pandemic really accelerated changes that were here in the field. So my plan for this presentation is to start kind of at this 30,000-foot view and talk about not really just culture shifts, but everything shifts. Because when the environment around us and the work that's expected of us changes, then we cannot continue doing the same things we always did and expect to get results. So that's one of the main messages here. So how do we decide what to do? I think being brave and fearless is part of it. I think networking and some things like that are part of it. But I also think that scanning our environment and understanding how the expectations have shifted is also critically important. All right. So changes in workforce needs are really important. These are things that you guys have probably already seen, but I wanted to mention a few of them and talk a little bit about what they might be. So one of the things, and I think Kimo was talking about this, is there is now a clear focus on business outcomes and performance. And this isn't really new to our field. In fact, it's not new at all. But I think as organizations become more savvy and also more concerned with their survival and adapting to change, that's a clear focus for all of us. L&D functions have taken on new responsibilities beyond deploying training programs. We are the ones who know how to get information to remote workforces. So we've been called on, especially during the pandemic, to broaden the work that we do, not just for training, but for knowledge management and for some other areas that we were not typically involved in. Our skill sets, we are first responders, and we have brought it to the table. Personal and professional development is now a competitive strategy for the workplace, because workforce needs are changing, performance is changing in other fields as fast as it is for L&D. And it's up to L&D to help the workforce keep track of those changes, to keep pace with those changes, as well as, companies use development as an advantage to attract talent. Nobody wants to work for an organization where they're not being developed. They're accelerating market and technology changes. You know what those are. And then we're also getting a lot of work done in our organizations with a gig workforce. Those of you who find yourself without a team employment may be considering whether you want to join that gig economy going very strong right now. But one key thing about using gig workers in the workforce is that they typically don't have access to the organizational systems as well as the organizational supports to get work done. Well, while those are interesting, let's talk a little bit about the impact that that has on the learning function. All right. So first and foremost, it means that every piece of learning that we do must impact performance, and it must impact it in a demonstrable way. We need to be able to build and maintain a learning culture, and that has to do a little bit with the resilience that Dawn was talking about before, but being able to get information to people when they need it, help them combine it in new and different ways when they encounter a new situation or when they encounter a situation that requires them to do something completely innovative. So we are part and parcel of coming up with those strategies and making sure that our tactics match what the workforce needs. Because we have this additional emphasis in the workforce on changes and upskilling people and making sure there's a lot of development to keep up with changing work needs, there's continuous training and upskilling going on. A lot of L&D functions gave people training when they onboarded, and then they gave people training maybe when they switched to a different role. Now we're going to have to be training more continually across the life cycle of somebody's tenure with our organization. And again, because that is a competitive advantage, we need to find ways to do that, as well as to keep our assets in the L&D function up to date and relevant to our workforce. Another impact that the changes in our environment and our workforce are having on the learning function is we have to really focus on transferable skills. Some people call those soft skills. That's not a debate I want to have right now, but the idea is that we are training people to have lateral moves in the organization. We're training people to encounter new and different situations every day. So when we do our training, we can't focus just on little discrete pieces of how to do this piece of a job. We really need to focus on these more transferable skills, and that's a very different kind of ask for many L&D functions. In addition, we need to look at data literacy. So data are ubiquitous as systems have become ubiquitous. We need to teach people how to use that data to solve problems, how to use that as part of the feedback system that helps us decide what to do next. And then again, technology. Organizations are putting a lot of investment right now into learning experience platforms. We started 100 years ago having just document repositories, and we thought that was really great. People could go and get that. And then we had content repositories, and we had learning management systems. Well, now we're focused on the learner experience because we know it's not about just putting content out there. It's about making sure that people have those opportunities to build those skills and have those experiences that are really going to make a difference on the job. So these are some impacts that are being had on the learning function. What does that mean for us in terms of our skill sets? So this is a piece of research, kind of an analysis of research, but it's shown that among the weakest competencies in L&D professionals are organizational performance analysis, performance measurement, and business and training performance assessment. And those italics are mine. I put that in there.
Your audio cut out there. It's still on mute. So I'm not sure. I think you might try, actually, I'm going to ask Michelle or Clara if either of you know, does she need to refresh, or because I think we've had this happen other times as well, right? Does anybody, let me just see.
Suzanne, this kept happening.
All right, Dawn.
Yesterday.
My apologies for this. Let's see. Tina. Yeah.
Yeah. It happened to me a few times yesterday. I think, unfortunately, a refresh is the only way that I know to fix it. So if you just go up to the top of the browser window and just click the refresh, you'll have to, it'll bring you right back in, hopefully unmuted.
So Tina, why don't you come on camera for a second?
And see the mess that I am today. Hello.
Hi. Hey, Tina.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I mean, you know, we just have to roll with some of these technical issues. Here, Dawn is coming back.
Fingers crossed. Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
Okay.
Oh gosh, you guys.
All right.
I know.
Yes.
So I don't
All
know
right, we're back.
you because I was like presenting away and not looking at that particular screen. So shall I start here?
Yes, I think you should go ahead and start there. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks
for rolling with it.
Nope. Look at me. I'm roly-poly. Look at us go. All right. So as we're looking at trends, my point is that this is what research has shown to be the things that we are the most deficient in as learning and development professionals. And they are related to analysis and evaluation. And a lot of folks that I know in the field who have kind of avoided kind of analysis and evaluation because of the numbers and because of the measurement. However, if we are going to be professionals who work in the context of having an impact on our organizations in the way that we would like, we need to have the tools and the techniques to understand how to do this work and how to use it in our other practices in order to make a difference. So for the remainder of this presentation, I've left some time at the end, but I want to walk through a couple of key concepts that I think I have found to be helpful to others, at least they've given me that feedback, and then talk about some competencies and capabilities. And with that, when I get to those, I would like you to kind of mark down the ones that you would care to discuss, and we can, if there's some energy around that, we can have some discussion about that. Okay. Now, there's my mouse. So we talk about performance, and I think it makes sense for me just to take a couple minutes and talk about what performance is. And performance are actions that produce outcomes of value. And I want to differentiate performance from as a focus for L&D efforts from looking at topics. So one of the stories that I think is always top of mind for me, I was working with a client who was given the opportunity to support, really it was a multi-billion-dollar sales effort, opening up sales in the Pacific region. And they were told, you know what, our salespeople need negotiation skills. So the L&D team went out and they did their research and they created the best program on negotiation, pulling the stuff they thought was the very best from the best sources on the planet. They put the training program in place and it was dinged completely. The reason for that is they focused on the topic of negotiation, and that's how it was conveyed to them. But what they didn't do is take a moment to think about what are the behaviors, what are the actions, what are the performances that the sales force is going to need to do business in China. The sales process is different, and guess what? The negotiation skills were very specialized and different from what that L&D team had sourced. What I recommend we do as L&D professionals is make sure that we adopt a performance mindset. So our goal is not to produce training programs. Our goal is to our goal is to change the capability of our workforce, to change performance in such a way that the organization is able to do something differently or better than they were able to do before. The first suggestion I have for all of you, if this is not something that you do, if it is, please feel free to weigh in, is to change the conversation. I think Kimo used the word in the previous session about being an order taker. No, we are game changers. So instead of somebody saying, hey, we need you to develop some training for us, you don't say, oh, what's the topic? How many days could it be? What medium should we use? The first question we always ask is, what's the problem? What are we trying to accomplish? And then we start with the end in mind. We start with the end in mind. And our focus then, as we continue in our investigation, and I'm here at the analysis part of our projects, of course, is we need to focus on what learners need to be able to do. Not what topic the training needs to be on, but what learners need to be able to do. And that means very specifically that we are focusing on the performances, and they may be unique from subsets of learners to subsets of learners. But that is our focus. What do our learners need to be able to do? So I wanted to show you, I'm going to pull all of these up together, but I like this series of photos because if you look at each one, they illustrate something very different, a different kind of performance. I think we would all agree that learning how to swim in a pool is very different than perhaps swimming in an open body of water where you have temperature variations, where you have waves, where you may have creatures. And then it's completely different learning to swim in a situation where you might perhaps be in whitewater, you might be out in all kinds of conditions, and perhaps swimming for the purpose of rescuing another individual. So the performance context that we operate in makes a huge difference in terms of what learners need to be able to do. And unless we get in and learn about what that is, we are not able to impact performance. When we're facing a situation where there's new performance, in other words, we're asking people to do something new or different from what they did before, these are some of the kinds of things we need to find out. These aren't necessarily interview questions, by the way, but things that we need to learn. So we need to learn, what are they expected to accomplish? What is the reason behind this new performance that's expected? Another thing we want to learn about is how new or unfamiliar is this new performance compared to what they were doing before. Because if it's really new and really different, they may have to unlearn some behaviors that are now reflex. It also may mean that it is pretty much the same, and so it's not a big lift for learning. If it's very different, then of course we need to take that into consideration for the scope of the training program. Another thing to always ask that's related to performance is, how will the organization support this performance? Because you guys know as well as I do, a lot of times there's an organizational issue, they throw it over the transom to learning, and they say, you guys fix the problem, when no enduring organization level problem can really be fixed unless the organization supports the new performance. Now, if you're being called in, we're being called in as L&D professionals to solve a performance problem. You know, a lot of times a client, I've heard clients say, you know what, we've already trained them on this, but the training didn't take, so train them again. They're not doing what we want them to do. Well, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, doing the same things and expecting a different result is actually a definition of insanity. So we don't want to do that. So we want to really dig in here. So if our learning is being targeted to people who have a performance problem, we want to know, why are they not doing this now? What barriers are they facing? What obstacles are in their path that are keeping them from doing this work? What tools and resources should they have? What tools and resources do they have to bring to bear on this particular performance situation? And what consequences are they experiencing? You know, there are a lot of times that the easy way to do your work is not the right way. And if there are no consequences for that bad behavior or the poor performance, then people will naturally tend to take the easy way out. One of the things I'd like to especially recommend as you're collecting data about performance problems is that you definitely consider and emphasize the need to ask questions or to get information from the learners. One of the things that I have seen as a trend in analysis methodologies, and I notice sometimes when I'm asked to come in and help learning functions that aren't getting their goals to reformulate what they do, this is one of the key things I tend to find, is that we're asking managers or others what they think the learners need to be able to do, and not getting that perspective from the learners, which is an absolutely critical perspective. So this is something that when you're doing your investigations, make sure we're talking to the people who know the work the best, and that's the learners. All right, so I promised you when we got to this point that I would be showing you some critical capabilities. I've got two slides. One is at the organizational level, and one is more at the working with people. This isn't an organizational competency, it's an individual competency that's organization focused. So see if there are any of these that resonate with you, and we can maybe talk about some of the skills that would go into that, or what you think about these as capabilities, because I wanted to leave you with some clear direction about some things you might want to do to add to your toolkit as an L&D professional. So at the organizational level, and again, Kimo was talking about this, and I was delighted to hear it because it's very critical. One is absolutely understanding the business. I can't tell you how many times I go into L&D functions and no one can tell me what the current business initiatives are, or how they're connected to business initiatives, or how they're connected to some of the key business metrics that the organization is using and reporting and sharing in other parts of the business, other functional silos. So understanding the business is absolutely key. And like Kimo said, you need to be able to consult and to partner with folks talking that business language, not the jargon of L&D, but really understanding how to consult and partner. And consulting is a key skill set because we don't own what happens out in the workforce. We are influencers. And so having a broad interpersonal influencing consulting skill set is absolutely critical to being able to get results and partnering with other organizations, because sometimes we only own the learning piece, but we need to make sure that other organizational supports are in place. Analyzing organizational performance is absolutely critical, being able to know what metrics your organization is collecting, what they do with those, how they prioritize them, and anything else that really helps us understand what those priorities are and what.
So I think we lost your audio again, which is very frustrating. Yeah, Michelle says, curse you, tech. Yes, we're all doing that. So why don't Dawn, why don't you refresh one more time? Okay. And maybe people can put in chat, like one of those topics that you think it would be good to dive deep into in our remaining minutes, or something that you have a particular question about. All right, so Karen is saying consulting and partnering, please. That piece of it. So Dawn, I had people start putting in the chat what are those areas or particular interests. So far we have consulting and partnering. And I know I'm always interested in the data analytics side of it, but I would be, so don't come at me.
All right, so remind me, I want to walk through this slide and the next one, and then we'll talk about them a little bit.
I will do that.
Okay. So, performance improvement strategies, knowing things besides knowledge and skill deficits that are going to impact performance. Understanding of that performance landscape is really critical. And then being able to leverage data and analytics. Okay, now everything's going crazy. My goodness. All right, we'll just go around the mouse. Okay, and then there are some like more individual level capabilities, but being able to assess business and training performance needs as you go out on an individual project and look at a needs assessment. Being able to leverage technology to the advantage of the project and its outcomes as opposed to favorite tools or available tools. So it's being able to really use the right tool for the right purpose. Applying knowledge management strategies, because as I said before, we're not only responsible for providing learning assets, but helping the whole organization become a learning organization and being able to manage the knowledge that we curate, and then evaluating training's impact on performance. So let me go ahead and stop there and see what you all might have to. Oh, completely lost my mouse. I have no idea. We went through a tech check, you guys. I want you to know. We really did.
I think that people have realized, we've said it a number of times, that it's a new platform and they have done some enhancement recently. So we're seeing a little bit of glitchiness here and there. But what I'm seeing in chat is interest in best places to get deeper data analytics, consulting and partnering are two pieces of that. And maybe I'll throw a question at you that combines a little bit of that. What I find sometimes working with the business side is, they want to measure performance, measure the learning interventions that we're doing, but they're asking me to measure things that like I want the things that are so important that the business is measuring them for themselves, not just because we have a training program. Does that make sense? What are the business measurements of success?
So yeah, if you're being asked to create new operational measures for the organization in order to measure performance, there's already a gap there, right? Mm-hmm. So your instincts, I think, are exactly right. And again, Sometimes we wanted a seat at the table. We got a seat at the table, and then we said we can measure stuff, and they said, okay, go ahead.
Right.
Right. But it's really about partnering, and it's about the organization. Organizations don't, and when I work with master's and doctoral students, they get the impression in the books that they read that these measures are out there, that they exist, and that they're really useful for understanding performance. And none of that is true. There are measures, but sometimes we have to create that conceptual chain. That's where the understanding of the business and that consulting capability, when you consult, sometimes you're a facilitator, sometimes you're a coach, sometimes you're a trainer, and sometimes you're an expert. So having fluency in figuring out what role you need to play to move that project forward is critical.
And then when it comes to the, one of the hurdles I find sometimes in measuring success of a program or performance is from a data perspective, we don't always have access to the data on the business side to be able to show the impact. Is that something that you've run into just from like a data perspective, like actually getting the data and analyzing it?
So, people will tell me, we want to create, we want to take this call center and we want to make sure that they're able to meet these objectives. Well, if we don't know what's currently happening, how do we know what needs to change? Where did that ask even come from? Except somebody deciding that it was, let's let L&D take care of it. So that's another of the partnering skills. So when you get the trust and the partnership with your business partners, the people who you are serving, let's face it, we're a helping profession. When we get their trust, then we can partner with them to do our work. This is not something we take away and do and then bring back. This is a partnership. And so when you're asked to do something that requires you to be psychic, that requires you to use resources you don't have access to, that requires you to have a line of sight to something that's invisible, that's the time, I think, to push back and to partner, because
I love that. I love that you said when you're being asked to do something that requires you to be a psychic.
Well, honestly, I attempted sometimes to answer my phone 24 hours, psychic design. So when people are expecting us to do something that we're not positioned to do, we need to figure out, how can we partner? And that's a good question. How can I partner with you to get this data so that we're all looking at the same thing? And then we can figure out together what needs to happen from learning and other parts of the organization to impact this performance.
Yeah. And something that I've found is sometimes the initiatives that we're working on, like workforce transformation, and there are certain things that we're trying to do in terms of, let's say, greater automation, greater technical tools. The things that we're measuring, I can't tie one training program to them, because it's also a recruiting strategy. It's a training strategy, like it's an entire people strategy. Right. So like I've started calling them sort of indicative measurements of performance, in that it's an indicator, like these key performance indicators, that, but we're going to have to lump in with recruiting and all the other efforts of our leaders and people. I can't tie one program to one outcome. And sometimes they want us to.
But we don't. Well, if they want us to, again, if it's not appropriate, that's when we need to educate, right? Mm-hmm. That's when we become facilitators and we become trainers, and we tell them this is not, there is no important metric in the organization that is affected typically by one functional area. And certainly an e-learning program of 45 minutes is not going to have a big impact. So I think you're exactly right, Suzanne. We have to form those conceptual chains. We have to say that these things working with these things, you don't get on an airplane and try to figure out how much the gas contributed to the successful flight. That's not that's not a useful question. It's not a reasonable question. But we're the ones who brought that issue to the table and said we can do that. What we should have said, we can partner to make sure that our efforts are contributing in an appropriate way to these important outcomes of the business.
I love that analogy. I'm going to use it sometime. along with a lot of other
Right.
people on this call. But I think it's so important. I mean, it speaks to everything you've talked about in terms of a consultative partnership with the business. I think that's really very powerful, and I think it's a really important skill for everyone to have, and also to feel empowered to push your leaders and not just be an order taker, like you were saying.
You have to be a game changer because
Mhm.
people misunderstand what we should and can do. That's not their fault. But we need to be the ones to educate and take that on as our responsibility so that we can bring our best work forward.
Yeah, and I think because we're out of
Yes.
time, and I want to bring back this loop to, this track was on our own development. We've talked about networking, and we've talked about being brave, and we've talked about the importance of working closely with business leaders and having business knowledge and consultative knowledge. I think part of what that means is that for all of us, our personal growth, being connected to this industry and the thought leaders in this industry and being part of these conversations is incredibly important for you, so that when you're going on an interview or you're hiring someone, that you know what the current conversation is, and you can talk like Dawn talks about these things and have great analogies like she has. It's really important to connect. So thank you so much, Dawn, for that. And